Um, I'm essentially trying to bring back as many native plants as I can, because these native plants are really the building block to bring back the ecology in our urban settings, which are really filled with plants from other parts of the world, kind of like the people, you know? So I just have to approve. Wonderful. Thanks so much for the invite. And sorry it didn't work the first time, but hopefully there'll be something that we get out of it here. And you know, I grew up on the south shores of Lake Simcoe. My name is Ben Porchuk. I'm an ecologist. My parents had a summer cottage on Georgina Island, First Nations, Chippewas of Georgina. So, you know, I've always been immersed in Native culture, and for the longest time I said I was a Native wannabe, because, you know, I feel like I didn't really fit in with our society. And then a few elders corrected me that, you know, I really wouldn't want to be saddled with what you guys have gone through. So it's something, you know, especially recently, my sincere condolences. I know how hard our family is taking the news that everybody really knew, but these gruesome discoveries, which will just keep happening, you know, I can't really put it to words, but what I can say is I'm super honored to be here. The best job of my life is when I did traditional medicinal plant inventories with some First Nations elders at Amjanan in Sarnia. And it was Isaac Day who used to spend time, I think, in Six Nations that really, you know, put me in my place at one point and said, you're acting like an animal too much. Sit with this plant and have a conversation with it. And I kind of, you know, inside I said, wow, well, I'm sort of leading this walk, but I didn't dare say that out loud. And so I sat with it, had a great conversation. And then from that point on, I kind of call myself a recovering scientist, to be honest, because I realized there's so much more mystery than facts out there. And, you know, a lot of the stuff that when I hear a lot of Indigenous people talk about the culture and the spirituality, a lot of that exists currently, but has been lost. So for whatever little part I play in this to help recover some of it from one aspect, that's what I'm here to do. So I'm going to switch my camera now, see if I can do this. Let's see here. Okay, so can everybody see this water system here?
Yeah.
And can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this took me the better part of 6 or 7 years to build. And what I'm showing you right now, I'm 10 feet up on a ladder, and my place here is in Wortley Village in London, Ontario, and I'm really fortunate to have a big old house that was built in 1890. This is the back of the house, and the yard stretches 217 feet deep. So, you know, just working on a shed right now. Really grateful to have this space, but as you can see along the margins on both sides, and I'll show you in the front, I've taken this away from the traditional lawn. This wetland system here, for example, has 25 species of native plants. And, you know, the other joke that I used to make is that when I'd introduce myself, and it was not really a joke, is that I kind of consider myself an invasive species. So one of these transplanted species, which in the natural world, a lot of these plants are beautiful plants in their own right, where they occur in nature, in their own continent and where they're from. But when they come to North America, you know, a lot of people don't realize, but earthworms aren't native in Eastern North America. And so, you know, we really have to work with these systems. So I've dedicated about, you know, 30% of my entire yard in the front and back. Well, the front is all native plants to recovering these species. And in total, there are 220 to 250 species, depending on, you know, what's coming and going. So this pond system, this is kind of fun. It goes down almost 4 feet. So it's 1.5 meters. I've got a reservoir with a pump. I do have some fish in this deeper system. And then this system right here is called a biological filter. I can't really zoom in. And then on the other side, that really lime green thing, that's all duckweed. That's a pond for dragonflies and for toads. And when that overflows, like it did today because it rained so much, it goes into the biological filter. They're actually linked. And then in the center of the screen here, you're seeing a rock bridge. So I can step on that, but the water flows underneath it. And then it goes back into this pond system that has all of these cells where you see the plants growing. And I'll get down the ladder and I'll show you individually some of the species. But what I really wanted to show is, even though we can't have an entire wetland ecosystem in our backyard, there is a way to kind of engineer something that kind of mimics the structure of what we see in nature. And what we see in nature really is water flowing. And the water is often purified by the plants, right? Especially wetland plants and prairie plants. So in the middle here, on the higher ground that you can see kind of near that statue, I've got some prairie species because this is really the only part of my yard that gets some sunlight. Well, I kept experimenting with it. I've never really done one before. So, you know, I would have, I would do some mistakes and have to re-engineer it. And I'm one to do something first and then I'll read about it afterwards and say, oh, that's what I did wrong. You know, and when I look at this now for some of the companies that build them, if you were to hire me, if I did this or hire somebody like me, just for this pond and waterfall and reservoir, it's about $30,000 to $40,000. So that's why I did it on my own and kind of learned on my own as well. But now I actually incorporate in this into a thing I call nature sense grounds, which I'll talk about a little more. I put them in at schools, and I'm hoping to put one in at Sioux Lookout in combination with some First Nations communities and the health clinic up there. So I have actually started to do this on a larger scale, but yeah, it was because it was so much trial and error for me. And I do have a few non-native plants in here because, you know, my wife likes some of the color that you can get, but there are very few in comparison to the native plants that you can find here. All right, well, I'm gonna come down now carefully on the ladder because it just rained really heavily here today. Are you guys, when you're designing something like this, if you're really wanting to do it in your backyard, a really important thing is to look up. When you look up here, because it's an old neighborhood, you see pretty much nothing but tree canopy, except for right above the pond, right here. This is essentially the only opening of sunlight. And this opening of sunlight allows me to put in things like prairie plants that really need sun compared to a lot of the forest plants. So when you walk through the woodland here, you can see things like gray-headed coneflower. A lot of our prairie plants will flower in mid to late summer and even fall. This is another prairie plant here. Sometimes I just lose the names. This is giant ironweed, but I actually trim the ironweed because it would be 7 or 8 feet tall here. So a lot of these plants I will trim down. And what we find in nature is that prairie and wetlands kind of go hand in hand. They move in and out. So this is blue flag iris here, which is in the biological filter. Yesterday when I was working on my shed, and my wife keeps saying, she looks out the window and she said, "You're hardly ever on the shed. I see you sprinting over to the pond." Well, there were hummingbird moths feeding, nectaring on these blue flag irises. They really, if you didn't know what you're looking at, you would think, oh, it's just a tiny little hummingbird, but it was actually a sphinx moth called the hummingbird moth. Here on this leaf, and this is the kind of thing that I really keep trying to expand on. This is called, and you can't see it very well, but it's a long-legged fly. And after doing some research, you know, you might think, oh, there's a little fly there. I've discovered that we have about 50 species of long-legged flies in Eastern North America. Oh, There's a spectacular one here that's iridescent, blue and green. I'm going to try to zoom in. Oh, it just flew away. But there's one here. And, you know, I mean, I don't need to tell First Nations people like how things are so connected, right? But the more and more time I spend out here, the more native plants I put in here, I realize it attracts more insects. And of course, the insects are just so crucial because they, let me just move over here slightly away. The insects will use the native plants to complete their life cycles and then attract larger insects. And then after that, of course, they attract birds. And birds will help rebuild the ecosystem. So one of the things I'm really working on is bringing back some of the trees, because some of our trees that are absent, especially in our urban areas, this one right here is doing very little after a year. It's called the pignut hickory tree. Our trees have specific insects that will feed on them. And without the trees here, like some of our oaks, for example, and the black cherry, they'll provide habitat. There'll be a host plant for up to 600 species of moth and butterfly. And without these trees, we don't have these butterflies and moths. So it's so critical to bring back our trees to start with. This one right here is one of these really important oak trees. It's only about 4 feet tall at the moment. And this one's called the bur oak. And here, right by my wetland, this one is a swamp white oak that my wife and I planted on our wedding day. We used the soil from where we grew up and we put it at the base. It's now close to 20 feet tall. And it's a swamp white oak growing near the wetland in symbolism. And then the other thing that, you know, that I will kind of go off on a bit of a tangent here. I really started this thing 6 years ago in North America. I became Canada's first certified forest therapy guide, which sounded really funny to me when I first read about it. But it actually is really helping people find that connection to nature that they have lost, because so much of us, like when you look at all of societies combined in North America, we spend 91% of our time on average inside. And because of that, we're so disconnected to nature. And I'm not talking about First Nations people specifically, just when you average out all the people. And so forest therapy, which again, this is why I've called myself a recovering scientist, because I thought I knew so much. And now that I sit and I quiet my mind and I open my senses in the forest bathing or forest therapy arena, I realize how little I know and how important it is to get outside and not think. And this one here, this tree, is a conifer called an eastern hemlock. And hemlocks and pine trees and spruce and cedars, they give off a chemical compound called phytoncides. Phytoncides are essential wood oils, the smell of pine. So here's an eastern cedar, which is, you know, a very traditional and important medicine for your culture. I was so lucky that so many cedars were planted here on this property. But the phytoncides are actually, they're airborne tree medicines that the trees give off. And they give them off so that all trees, not just themselves, can ward off insect, fungal, and bacterial infections. Like without conifers and oak trees, which also give off phytoncides, the trees get sick faster. And that's why in cities, trees die so much earlier than they do when they're in the wild, because there aren't enough trees to give a strong concentration of phytoncides. This is one of my white cedars. But what's really interesting is that when a person comes in contact in an area where you can smell this, these airborne tree medicines are medicine for us, because the science has shown, and of course I know indigenous cultures have known this the world over. There's another hemlock. Science has shown that when we inhale phytoncides, the smell of pinene from the different conifers and the oak trees, it stops our cortisol production. Our cortisol production is our stress hormone. The more stressed we feel, the more likely we are to disease, the more likely we gravitate to poor foods that don't support our bodies. And so they're essentially trees giving off free medicines. And when people get into cities, they tend to like to have a lot of open space, right? So it becomes a cycle that feeds itself. There are fewer phytoncides, less healthy air. So the more you are in a setting with trees, especially conifers and oaks, the healthier you are. And a lot of the research is showing this. And so even though things like forest therapy sound like they are new age, they're actually really based on a lot of scientific research. And of course, that scientific research is essentially affirming the Aboriginal traditional knowledge, of course, that's inherent in your culture, and a lot of which is passed on through generations, but a lot of which we're really trying to recover, all sorts of people. And so any questions from that at all? Just keep rambling on. Oh, is there any Carolinian species specifically that have pinene? Well, you know, there are some species of Carolinian trees that that are found in other parts of Canada. For example, like the eastern hemlock, the white pine, the eastern red cedar, and the white cedar. These are all excellent for pinenes. And then our oaks. You know, we thought we only had 11 or 12 species of oaks. Now, after some research, we're finding that a lot of the hybrid oaks, so we have up to 35 species of hybrid oaks that move across the landscape, they also give off pinenes. And a lot of those oak trees are only found in the Carolinian zone. So yeah, there are some specific ones, and the ones that I think of that are really important that we only have here and that your community has a lot of would be chinquapin oak, dwarf chinquapin oak, which only gets 15 to 20 feet tall, pin oak, black oak. There are a lot of great oaks that we can use. And oaks are also the #1 tree to use in trying to rebuild our ecology, because they attract the insects more so than any other species of tree. Right behind them are the black cherry, the yellow birch, and the white birch. Even though the white birch really isn't a Carolinian species, but the yellow birch certainly is. And then some of our native willows as well. So yeah, please keep the questions coming. I want to show an example of some of my learning here. One of the more common trees that's actually, it's not common, but it's found in Carolinian Canada, nowhere else in Canada, is the tulip tree, right? Which is also called the tulip poplar down in the States. This tree right here, I purchased in Windsor in 1996. I had a place on Pelee Island. I thought I would live there forever and never move. And I planted it on Pelee Island, but I didn't know anything about it. I planted it in the wrong spot. And so for 15 years, it didn't get higher than 6 inches, or, you know, maybe 30 centimeters. So when I finally moved to London, when I got voted off the island, and that's another story that I would love to tell someday, I planted it in the right soil. And in under 15 years, now, after being pretty much 15 years there, it's now 60 feet tall. And so we do really need to know, a fair bit about soils. And actually, I've started to do a lot of research on soils, and the diversity that we find in the soils is so critical for how the plants are going to do. But then it's actually the plants that build the soil, and it's not building the soil just because they drop leaves and create that humus layer, that layer of dead sticks and branches. It's actually, and this I'll say very, I'll summarize because it's kind of technical, but to me, it's just so fascinating. What our native plants do is that the root systems, the tips of the roots give off a sugary substance that's high in protein, carbohydrates, and sugar. It's very sticky. And those substances are called exudates. And the reason why they give off exudates is to attract bacteria and fungi. The bacteria creates a glue around the root systems. The fungi creates aeration so that the roots can breathe. And so whenever big storms come, the bacteria hold the root systems in place. So even floods, anything, they stick with the plant. The plant actually can't eat from the soil until the bacteria and the fungi are attacked by the microbes, by the single-celled organisms, the single-celled animals called microbes. There's a big battle. Some of the bacteria and the fungi die, and that's what the plant takes up in nutrients, vitamins, and minerals. Without that battle, the plants would not survive. And so when we look at an individual plant in a native system, some of them, they give off different types of exudates to attract different types of bacteria and fungi. When we look at a woodland system, if you go out into Six Nations and you just dug up some soil and you took 1 teaspoon, you'd have about 50 million species of bacteria and fungi in 1 teaspoon. If you go into your lawn or into a farmer's field, you probably wouldn't even have close to 1 million. So these plants are essentially harvesting and creating a program, a sharing program with the bacteria and the fungi. And who would have known, really? So, science is important, but this is the kind of thing that we innately know. And I won't say anything more about soils because, some people say, oh, that's just not so interesting, or we can't really see it. I understand that, right? So now, are there any questions about that before I go and show you my front yard? But before I show you my front yard, I want to talk a little bit about pawpaw trees, if anyone's interested in that. Oh, that's the thing. They don't, because they have a really deep taproot, and I've been experimenting with it. I'm not a grower. I don't have a super green thumb, but my experience is the best way to do it is to, there's a company in Leamington called AMA Plastic, which is kind of funny. It's the only container that I've found that seemed to work for nut trees. And it's right here. So this container is really tall and relatively narrow. And so this allows for the taproot in oak trees and hickory trees to grow for 1 year. So you can grow them in a container for 1 year. And then after that, they really get unhappy. So I think the best way is to find the nuts and to plant them out, and no squirrels are going to find most of the ones that you plant, and know that they'll eat a good chunk of those. But a lot of them, they will dig them up and they will plant them in places that you were just totally surprised. You're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe the squirrel did this, right? So that's the opportunity. So it is a little frustrating because we love to see a big tree come out. But in reality, when we buy a big tree from a nursery, that smaller tree is going to do much better when you plant it, because it has the opportunity to do its own root system, to get its own moisture system started and everything. But the people, the amazing people at Cayenne, is that how I say it? know so much more than me, but I don't think they grow hickories. Yeah, so that's been my experience so far. And I, you know, I did plant one right here, which is a shagbark hickory. And this is the food source for the Luna moth, which I'm actually rearing right now. So this is a shagbark hickory that is 10 years old. The lighting isn't great, but you can see the big leaves, and it's a little taller than 10 feet right now. And I tried to plant a bunch in containers. The squirrels raided me, but look, right beside the one that I planted out is another shagbark hickory, which isn't a sucker. So this one is actually coming from a nut that a squirrel planted, which, growing in twos beside each other, people would say, those trees are only like 3 feet apart. Well, of course, books like The Hidden Life of Trees that have come out recently are showing us that through the mycorrhizae fungal connections through the tips of the tree roots, that the trees will actually start to connect. Oh yeah, someone just said that we have the 3 types of hickory, no doubt. Six Nations Reserve is known as, not surprisingly, most of our best habitat remaining in Southern Ontario is in First Nations communities. So yeah, I've only been able to go out in Six Nations a few times, and every time I do, my jaw just drops for what is still remaining there. So so back to the root systems. Scientists over the last 20 years have really discovered that the root systems of plants of the same species are connected, and it's not always mother to children. It's often mother to relatives, mothers to complete strangers. And the mother trees will often give nutrients, minerals, vitamins to the younger trees that can't access them yet because their root systems aren't big enough. So there's a lot of sharing that goes on. This notion of competition and survival of the fittest is really being thrown out the window. It's more of an Aboriginal perspective, which again, to me, that's the recovering scientist that says, of course, that makes so much sense. It's not necessarily that they compete, but they don't join up root systems from what I understand. So, certainly even a single tree within its branches, the higher limbs are going to shade out the lower branches, and someone would say, well, look, it's competing with itself. Is it doing that, or is the organism itself, is the being just reaching for the light, and then it's letting things fall away that needs to fall away, which is a great metaphor for our own life, right? So a tree is going to shade its lower branches for sure, but that doesn't mean it's competing with itself, right? So I don't know. I think there's a lot of room in there for a lot of discovery, and I wouldn't necessarily call it competition. Yeah, so I guess my answer is I really don't know. But there's so many good books lately that have come out about that. So, a lot of people will say that by planting so many trees close together, if you look here, these are the 2 shagbark hickories that I just showed you. One there and one there. And then right beside it, I have another white pine. There's another white pine right there. There's a Japanese term that's come out over the last 10 years called Miyawaki forest. And what Miyawaki forests are is that they've discovered in the era of really needing to have trees grow quickly is that if they plant them super close together, sometimes a foot or two apart, even though they're really, oh,
Can hear you.
I was just reading the message. Yeah. So maybe I'll read that message right after this. But so these Miyawaki forests are being planted in urban areas, and they're planted so close together, and they're finding the trees are growing 10 times faster because they do go for the light. So they grow really quickly, And then instead of waiting 30 years for like a really tall forest, you've got one in 10 years. And then you can start putting the understory in. You can put in shrubs and you can add in the ground layer. So, hi.
Hello?
Hi.
I was the one who, hi, it's Terry Lynn. I'm the one who put the stitch thing up. I think it's just that Western science hasn't done enough scientific research to prove what we already know, which is that all plant tree species support each other through what we in our languages call spider webs, which are the underground feelers and extenders of trees.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's a great comment. And again, it's why like I don't fully abandon science, but I'm at the point where I think, you know, we really need to go to indigenous systems and to you know, really finding solutions from many different aspects of society. So
and just as a reminder, we have to remember, like you're talking about Japan and stuff, like in science, Western science is the newest form of science research there is. We have lots of like Asian sciences,
right,
like from India, over in India, kind of like, so all cultures had studies of sciences that Western science is like the newest one. So it's kind of a baby.
right. Good point. Yeah, that's a great point for sure. Yeah, so I should just do a bit of a time check. Oh, there's another point. Oh, what plants did I use for the biological filter beside blue flag iris? Well, I've used this cardinal flower right here, which gets a bright red flower. I also have swamp milkweed, which isn't in bloom yet, right here. Swamp milkweed. The cattails I had for a while as well, but the cattails grow so tall here because I have so little sunlight. And then things like Joe Pye weed right here. This is Joe Pye weed. And then some other things just came in on their own, some woodland plants like the one that gives you a rash. It's not poison ivy, but I'm kind of blanking right now. Oh yeah, somebody can think of that. And then there are some plants here that are prairie plants. Oh, can you see this fly right here, this long-legged fly? This is the one I was telling you about that's iridescent. It's not really coming in. This is ironweed, of course. So because there's an oscillation between wetland and prairie species, I was able to use those two types. And then here is sensitive fern, which loves the wetlands as well. This is Monarda, or I'm blanking on the name of that one, but the scientific name is Monarda. And then there are various sedges, which are also a part of the filter right here. Spikehead sedge. This is kind of a neat one. Got all sorts of spike heads. And then there's turtle head here coming in. Turtle head.
What was that last sedge, please?
Spikehead sedge.
Thank
you. See it right here?
Yep.
Yeah. It's got these beautiful spikes. Mm-hmm. And then there's jewelweed as well, which comes in the yellow and the orange form. And there's also arrowhead right here, which gets a beautiful white and yellow flower. And then another one that you can find in prairies and rock areas, which really love coming in, was equisetum, which is, it's the orange flower that's pollinated by hummingbirds. I always blank on this one too. And if you look at the log over here, can you see the log in the water?
It's a skinny.
There's a log between the two rocks. The biggest dragonfly in North America, the swamp darner, came in and started laying eggs before I had any plants at all. And it turns out their habitat for the swamp darner dragonfly is small little openings in the canopy, just like this, in woodland areas. So the ecology really returned. The other thing that happened as well that I should tell you is that I had a lot of toads breed in this pond right here. That's not too exciting, right? And then I really wanted to cut this tree down here because this is a European willow tree, a weeping willow tree, right? And my wife said, no, no, I like it. Don't cut it down. And I said, well, it's half dead. And I came out to cut it down. And I'm not sure if you can see this here, but there's a hole up here. Can you see the hole there?
Yeah.
A screech owl poked its head out. A screech owl. Owls. And I realized that, wow, they're nesting in the backyard. And then the parents and the babies started crash landing right here on the lawn. And we watched from our windows and wondered what's going on. This was when the babies were big enough and had flown out of the nest. Do you know what they were doing on the lawn? The toads, the tadpoles metamorphosed out of the pond and were covering the lawn. The adult screech owls were teaching the babies in broad daylight how to catch the toadlets and feed on them. It was just amazing. And it was one of those aha moments where everything's connected. You know, that movie, that baseball movie, if you build it, they will come. It's exactly what was happening here with the swamp darners, the screech owls, the toads, the hummingbird moths. We've had snapping turtle hatchlings in this pond, and we're about 1.5 kilometers from the closest wetland. So it's just so remarkable how things are returning. So, do I have a few minutes to talk about pawpaw trees?
Yes, yeah, sure.
Okay, great. Yeah, so a friend of mine who's an ecologist got hired as a professor out in Calgary. And he brought he had 100 pawpaw trees that he had germinated, and he gave me a bunch and said, you know, can you use 100 trees? And I said, no. And then I realized, oh my gosh, I've got to give them away. And we created this program at Carolinian Canada where we gave away 100 trees 2 years ago. And some of our most memorable visit was at Everlasting Tree School when we brought in 4 trees and gave them to the women that were working there. And we met with some of the teachers and the students. We were all in tears. And I've never had fruit, but I'm getting flowers now. These are some of my biggest pawpaw trees. And so we ended up traveling across the Carolinian zone. Most of the trees we gave to Indigenous people that wrote in, but there were a lot of other people from the general public who wrote in. And so I've been on a quest every year to try to get 100 trees to give away. And people now send me pawpaw seeds from all over Carolinian Canada. And I have this set up here where I grow them now. I have an area that's protected from the squirrels. And these are the pots that I showed you earlier. This is my setup. These are my bins of soil. So whenever I find one, I pot them. And I'm also still getting a donation from an amazing man, retired forester named Donald Craig. And for the last 2 years, after the first year, I go with Donald Craig to his place because he's planted them out. And we dig them up and we transplant them into pots. And we use the 3-year-old trees. And here they are. These are the ones from Donald Craig. There are 125 trees that we'll be taking this fall, giving out to various First Nations communities and individuals, because to me, and I don't want to say that reconciliation is all about ecological restoration, but to some degree they're hand in hand, right? This tree really, this is a forest tree. And as settlers came to North America and destroyed the habitat and destroyed your people, this tree disappeared as well. There are only a few pockets of it left. These are the younger ones that I've grown on my own right here. And I keep them in this container because I want to make sure that nothing gets at them. And then over here, just by habit and hobby, I'm collecting oak acorns of various oak species because it's so fascinating, and I really love the act of trying to recover ecology. And so these are the trees that we will be driving for 2 days across the Carolinian zone. We asked people to sign up to our program that's called inthezonegardens.ca. And pretty soon, if you sign up and register your garden, you'll get a notice saying the Pawpaw Parade is coming soon. Would you like to register for a pair of trees? And this is the sign right here of Carolinian Canada's In the Zone Garden program. So if you go to inthezonegardens.ca, that's where you can sign up. It's a joint program with World Wildlife Fund and Carolinian Canada. And welcome to my front yard here. This is the one that a lot of people will say, wow, your house is crazy. It's nothing but native plants. Like, don't you want a lawn? And can you clean up that mess? They don't always say that, because at times of the year it looks quite manicured. And it's going into a phase right now where so much is going to be in bloom. And so, you know, things like dense blazing star right here. There's some more gray-headed coneflower. This is ironweed, which is just going to be so beautiful. Here's one of my 3 pawpaw trees that are growing. They have to be planted within 10 feet of each other or they don't germinate. There's the house. And I have a lot of hub trees, these native trees, which are critical, growing close together. And some examples are this one right here. We only have 2,000 of these trees left in Canada. It's called the dwarf hackberry. And we only have 200 of this tree right here. This is the cucumber magnolia tree. And some of them are growing not too far from you. And these trees will be in the canopy soon. There is a black cherry, which is really critical for wildlife as well. Some of our giant silkworm moths use it. Another endangered species right here is eastern flowering dogwood. This species right here, the hop tree, attracts the largest butterfly in North America called the giant swallowtail. When I planted my first hop tree right in this location 8 years ago, within 20 minutes, a female giant swallowtail, I had never seen one in London, showed up and started laying eggs on the leaves. It was just so incredibly black and white. This is one that's beautiful to just sit and stare at, the maidenhair fern. It's not strictly Carolinian, but wow, is it a beauty. This is another endangered tree that we have in the Carolinian zone, only in Canada. It's called the blue ash. It'll be 80 to 90 feet. A lot of these trees will be, and they'll be so close to my house that people will say, you're crazy. And I'll say, yeah, I'm crazy. And I want to rebuild urban ecology. And now some of this research is showing that when they're planted close together, they actually support each other. They create a windbreak. And, you know, they do quite fine, just fine. There's some wild ginger. Look at this beautiful wild ginger that you have all over the place in your community. It makes an amazing ground cover. This is one of the rarest herbs I have growing in my entire garden. It's called green dragon. We have maybe 15 populations of these in Southern Ontario, and I'm sure there are some growing in Six Nations in your community. And then over here, a little baby hemlock tree, which, you know, if it was in a healthy system, this tree would be close to 100 feet tall and it would live for 1,000 years.
Wow.
Now in Southern Ontario, they might live for 120 to 150. Here's another one of my pawpaw trees. I have 3 in total. Just look how tropical these leaves look. They're such a beautiful tree. And then over here, I've got a blue beech, which is a shrub. And the last thing that I think I'll show you is the chinquapin oak. I mentioned this. Someone asked about what do you have growing in Six Nations. There are a lot of chinquapin oaks there. It looks like actually a chestnut leaf. It's just gorgeous. The leaves, the nuts are very small. The acorns are actually eaten by some birds right on the branch. And then in my boulevard, I've got a lot of the prairie species because I actually get sunlight here. So I've got things like butterfly milkweed, which you have great amounts in your community. Swamp milkweed will grow here as well. And then one of my favorites of all is this tiny dwarf chinkapin oak. This tree at like 2 feet tall starts producing acorns. It's just remarkable. So this is a boulevard tree. I think all of our boulevards and cities, and I do have some Canada wild rye and I have some New England aster here, making it look very bushy and kind of messy. But again, I'm not so concerned about the looks as I am about the function. But when you stand back and you look at this garden, especially when it starts to go in bloom, like just to the left here of your screen, grow by these rocks everywhere. People will stop on the sidewalk and sit for 15 minutes and just look at the garden and kind of wonder what's going on here. They feel the resonance of restoration, of, you know, ecological reconciliation. This one here is very important for indigenous cultures. It's called the female plant or the blue cohosh. Apparently, Anishinaabe beadwork is patterned off a lot of the shapes of the leaves of this plant. They get bright blue berries. And to me, when I walk through a forest, I see this plant glowing. And I think those are kind of like twin spirits or something like that. That's what it feels like to me when a certain plant resonates with you, that plant has something for you. And that's what I learned from Isaac, actually, Isaac Day. That's why he said to me, you know, all of this knowledge you have in your books and the things you want to tell about us, about the plants are important. But until you have a conversation and you get to know that plant, its energy field, then you really don't know what the relationship is. Prickly pear cactus I used to have right here. I think somebody asked, but the other plants have shaded it. So I since gave it to someone who has more of a sunny garden because I really just can't grow everything here as much as I would like to. So yeah, that's my front yard. So thanks so much for listening to that. Oh, when we can get in person, I sure would love to come and do some. Oh, look at this here. Sorry to keep going, but this is an amazing ground cover called Canada Anemone. And most of it has gone to seed. Look at the seeds. Wow. Look at the seeds. They're like stars exploding with spikes on them. I mean, there's so much beauty in the detail that you could find here, and even different perspectives too. When you come here to the bottom of the maidenhair fern, it's just incredible. And one of the things that we talk about in forest therapy are fractals, are so important that when a person is recovering from surgery in hospital, if they can see trees outside of a window, they recover faster than the person that can't see them.
Wow.
Okay, well,
We're really impressed.
so honored to be able to be any part of a conversation with you guys. And if you have any more questions, want to send them to me, and when we can get together in person, I would love to come and maybe walk with some people and do some interpretation and just talk about ideas, because we really need so many different perspectives to come up with solutions that that are urgent, and you know, urgent not just for ecological recovery, but for reconciliation. I'm one of these land back people that you know, most of our land in Canada is Crown land and nobody owns it. That should be going back to First Nations, Métis, and Indigenous people. So there's a lot of work we could do right away. We could shift things so quickly. So yeah, I would love to have conversations and just to go out and meet anybody in person. And I'll see you remember to register if you want a pair of pawpaw trees. We can't get them to everybody, but we'll try our best to, and we're growing more and more of them. And I know other people are as well, so you might get them from another source too.
Okay, awesome. Does Terry Lynn want to say anything? She's from Mohawk Seedkeeper Gardens. She's at the top.
Oh, nice.
I don't know if she's busy right now, but
We got a couple of your trees from our young volunteer that works here. He's
Oh,
a
great.
forestry student. But
Super.
the trees that we specifically went after were the ones that we could historically prove, the pawpaws that we could historically prove that they were settler trees that came with the Haudenosaunee people here. So that's
Okay.
the ones that we're working. We've got about 20 of them that we're working on propagating them till they're a little older. They're only a few
Nice.
years old and they've been just dug, but there is a good pocket of a historical grove close to our community. But you got to have the energy to get out there to dig them too. I invite you to come on out the Mohawk Seedkeeper Garden. We do have a Carolinian food forest happening here, which is it's specific purpose. It's a living seed bank for our people, our community
Oh,
eventually in
right.
years to come.
Yeah. I had a volunteer come to my garden this spring because I was moving plants around. And so I gave a couple of pawpaws to somebody for that garden. Yeah.
Yeah,
for the
must
food
be Elliot.
forest. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'd love a visit.
So
to-
yeah,
to
so
your
if you
garden.
get to Six Nations, come by and visit us. We'd love to have
All
you.
right, definitely. Yeah. Thanks again for letting me in and for hearing out this little story.
yeah, we'll
Oh, I did want to ask about the prickly pear.
Oh, yeah.
I've got a big, huge one that I dug up at a lady's garden that she had gifted to me. But does the flower come out of the little pod on top, like the new growth on top? Is that?
Yeah,
that
it
turn into-
does,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is my first season seeing it grow and looks what I'm thinking is going to be flowers.
Great. Yeah. I think if it's in the sunlight, it does pretty well in Southern Ontario. So good luck with that.
Yeah, it is doing quite well.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. And I will be sending along some information on the nature sense ground that we're building. Essentially, it's doing a small scale restoration of a wetland, a prairie, and a forest. And then we put in some structures for play and for sitting and for contemplation. So it becomes like a reconciliation garden for both ecology and culture. And I did the first one in collaboration with the JICS Lab School in Toronto. And they have a really big native component of their teaching. So we had a directional water sign. It was just beautiful in 4 different native languages. So yeah, I'll send some information around that. It'd be a fun thing if we could do that in the community one day.
Yeah.
Everybody, I should run. Take care. Send any questions you might have, and we'll see you in person hopefully soon.